Hey everybody, welcome to my channel. Today I want to do a video that I've kind of been wanting to make for a while, and today I finally have the opportunity. I've got behind me a 2010 Toyota Corolla. I'm doing front brakes on this thing. I'm doing pads and rotors. I wanted to share with you guys a few tips and tricks on how I do a brake job and the way that I believe is the correct way to do it, and also the way that I believe if you follow these steps and you do these things, you'll have a lot of success. You'll have a good final product. You'll have a good brake feel, you'll have no brake noise, and you'll have a brake job that you can really be proud of. So I know it seems like everybody on YouTube, they have their own opinions on how to do brake jobs and things that you should and shouldn't do and all this kind of stuff. So I figured, hey, I might as well make a video and kind of throw my 2 cents in the mix. So when it comes to brakes, of course, there's a lot of very controversial things, a lot of different opinions on how to do things. So whether you agree or disagree with the things that I'm about to show you, feel free to let me know in the comments and we can have a good discussion about it. And hopefully by the end of the day, we'll all learn something. So I've actually already done the passenger side. So I'm over here right now on the driver's side and I'm about to get started on it. This is the old stuff, so I'm about to get the old stuff off. Looks like we got a nice little dirt dauber's nest here. I hope there's nothing inside. Looks like there isn't. Now, in case you're wondering, you might say, hey, well, those pads actually look pretty thick. Well, yes, but the reason this vehicle's in here is actually for a pretty bad brake pulsation. You step on the brake and the whole steering wheel shakes real bad. And besides, the inboard brake pad has a lot more wear on it. You'll see in just a minute. All right, so let me start out. Let me remove all this. I'm gonna start with the caliper. So my first tip is going to be, don't ever just let this hang by the brake line. Use a caliper hanger, or you can use a coat hanger. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. You don't have to go buy anything, but hang it right up there on the strut like that. Hang it on the strut like so. Okay, now the first thing that I always check once I get the caliper off, check the slide pins. Look at this. You see how this is seized up? It's not moving. Let's check this one. Same thing, seized up. That's going to be a big problem. These slide pins should move freely. Now this car, it has a little bit of a spongy brake pedal. So when you press on the brake, it kind of goes down to the floor a little bit. Now a lot of people, when they feel that, they think something's wrong with the master cylinder. Well, a lot of times it's actually when the slide pins get frozen and stuck, that's what happens to your brake pedal. So this needs to be addressed. Another thing that I'm noticing too is whoever did this brake job last, they made a bit of a mistake as far as where the squealers are located on the pads. So you see they put the squealer here and they put the squealer here. You actually, rule of thumb, you want the squealers to be where the leading edge of the rotor contacts the pad. So because this is the front right, when the car is going down the road, the rotor's spinning this way. So then this would be the leading edge of the rotor and this would be the trailing edge. So we actually want the squealers to be up here on the leading edge of the rotor. If the caliper were on the back side of the rotor, then it would be the opposite, and then you'd have the squealers there at the bottom, because then at that point this would be the leading edge and that would be the trailing edge. But anyway, the thing with the squealers, it's not a huge deal, it's not the end of the world, but get these pads off. Now I got to break these slide pins loose here, so what I'm going to do is, while the caliper bracket's still attached to the car, take a hammer and screwdriver and whack it out. This one wasn't stuck too bad. I've got some that get really stuck. There we go. Now, second problem is going to be on the slide pin. You see the brake lubricant that was used is kind of clumping up and creating some resistance, so we definitely don't want that. So I don't know what kind of brake lube they used, but we're gonna not use that kind. We're gonna use a different kind. But anyway, a lot of slide pins, they'll have these rubber bushings on them. In this case, on this 2010 Corolla, it's only this one slide pin that's got the bushing on it, and it goes here on the bottom. On the other side, it was actually the wrong way, and whoever did the last brake job, they put this pin at the top, which you're not supposed to do, and I'll explain that in a little bit as well. We get this slide pin out. Yeah, you can kind of see that old brake lube, it's all caked up in there. So we want to prevent that in the future by using a different type of brake lube that I'll show you in a minute. Okay, let me pull off the caliper bracket now. Alrighty, so when handling brake dust, you really should use gloves. So anyway, I've got gloves on. So the first thing I'm gonna do is the old hardware on the caliper, I'm gonna go ahead and remove it. So usually it just comes right off pretty easily. You can just take it off with your fingers. Sometimes you might have to pop it off with a screwdriver. But either way, take all that old hardware off. Now, something that a lot of people avoid or don't do with the brake job is right there where the brake hardware sits. You see there's a lot of rust buildup on the caliper. You're going to want to clean all that off. Now, the ideal way of doing it would be to sandblast it. I actually don't have a sandblaster here, so I'm gonna do it with a drill and with a wire brush. But either way, you wanna get as much of that rust off of there as you possibly can. Otherwise, the pads can get pinched because of all the rust, and then they won't slide freely. And then the other thing I'm gonna do is I'm actually going to pull off these rubber boots. Pull both of them completely off. And what I'm going to do as well, I don't know how well you can see, but it's all caked up with a whole bunch of gunk inside there, and that is definitely not going to fly. So we're gonna wanna clean all that out of both holes. Start by cleaning the caliper bracket here. Always use safety glasses while you're doing this. Okay, I'm skipping ahead a little bit. I've got that caliper bracket brushed off right there. So now I'm gonna take some brake parts cleaner, and then I'm just gonna spray it in there where the hardware sits. I'm gonna kind of blow dry that a little bit. Now it's kind of hard to see, but without a sandblaster, it's not gonna be perfect, but even with the wire brush, you can get pretty much most of the rust off of it. There's going to be a little bit of discoloration in the metal just from pitting and that type of thing, but you basically want it as clean as you can. Okay, now as I mentioned, the next thing, these holes where the slide pins go, you want to clean those out really well. You want this to be as clean as possible. That way your slide pins don't get seized or stuck. So the way that I do it is I spray a bunch of brake clean in these holes to get some of the loose stuff out. Then I purchased this set of brushes. There comes with about maybe 20 of them in a set from Harbor Freight. They're really not that expensive. A different assortment of these little wire brushes that you can attach to your drill. And I run those in and out of the holes and clean them up real nicely. So let me get that taken care of right now. Stick the straw all the way in the hole. I'm gonna run this brush in and out. I'll run it the other way. Switch over. Actually, I'm going to use this bigger diameter real quick. All right, shoot some more brake clean in there. Now I'm gonna blow dry it a little bit. Now at the end of this, I don't know if you can see down in that hole, but you see how clean it is in there? It is perfectly clean. I promise you it is worth your time to do this. Clean the inside of these holes, get them super clean like this. That way you can avoid issues in the future. Okay, so this bracket is almost ready to go. Next, what I want to do is I want to focus on these guys real quick, these slide pins. Now on many cars, as this one, the slide pins will actually be different lengths. So you can see the one with the rubber bushing is smaller, shorter, and the longer one does not have the bushing. And in this particular car, the shorter one with the bushing goes on the bottom and the longer one goes on the top. So just make sure to pay attention to that. And don't always assume that whoever did the last brake job did it correctly. And these rubber bushings here, I always remove them and replace them. So I'm just gonna use a pick and I'm going to remove this rubber piece. Okay, next, all this rust and this debris on these slide pins needs to get cleaned up before we can go any further. All right, my slide pins are cleaned. And of course, if you guys don't have a bench grinder with a wire wheel attachment, which you probably don't, then you can either use a brush attachment on a drill, or you can even use sandpaper. Sandpaper might be the cheapest and easiest way to do it as well, but either way will get you good results if you take your time. Okay, now let's talk about these little rubber bushings and these rubber boots. So now what I'm going to be using is this little kit that I got from O'Reilly Auto Parts, and I already used half of it to do the other side of the brake job. But I highly suggest during your brake job that you buy this little rubber boot kit that comes with the boots for the caliper slide pins, and it also comes with the little rubber bushing. Now this little pack, I mean, it's like $5 or $6. It doesn't cost hardly anything. It's very cheap, and most of the time on a brake job, you're gonna need these anyway, because most brake greases on the market today, they deteriorate these rubber boots anyway, and they swell up, and then the slide pins don't slide right because they get stuck in the boots. And then these little rubber bushings, they swell up, and then the slide pins don't work right. So don't try to reuse these. For $5 or $6, just get a whole new kit. So now I'm gonna take the slide pin, stick the new rubber bushing on. And I'm gonna put this to the side for now. Now I have new brake hardware that came with the new pads. If your pads don't come with hardware, get some hardware. Okay, now this right here, guys, this is the brake lube that I've come to love and use and recommend. This brake lube right here, you can buy it at O'Reilly Auto Parts, maybe AutoZone too, I don't know. If they don't have it in stock, they can order it for you. This is the stuff I would use. This does not deteriorate rubber, and it will keep your slide pins working great for a long time. Okay, so what I actually want to do with this stuff first is I'm going to take a little bit out, and you really don't need a whole lot. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to apply it on the caliper bracket. This might actually, I think I actually got a little too much. I'm going to apply some on the caliper bracket, and I'm going to put it where the hardware. Excuse my coworker in the background there, making all kinds of racket. Can't believe he's doing that in a mechanic shop. What's wrong with people? Anyway, so I'm going to apply some of this lubricant underneath where the hardware sits on the caliper bracket. And what this is actually going to do is it's going to help prevent some of that rust buildup in the future, which in turn will prevent the pads from getting pinched by the rust. So I'm going to put some here, I'm going to put some here. I'm going to kind of put some up here too. Make sure everywhere where the hardware sits gets some of this lube. Make sure it gets way in the corners too. And as I mentioned, don't go crazy with this. Don't put so much that it's just glopping everywhere. Just a little thin coat is all you need. Next, I'm gonna take my hardware, snap it into place here. Make sure it gets fully seated. Okay, once your hardware is in place on the caliper bracket, let's get the slide pins to put in now. It's kind of a similar situation here. We're not going to put a whole lot. We're just going to put enough to put a thin coat all over the surface of the slide pin. some on the other slide pin as well. Okay, now before I put the boots in, I'm gonna demonstrate something about the long and short slide pins. So the way that this is supposed to go is, if this is the front of the wheel, the bracket should go this way. I believe I'm doing this right, yeah. So this one should be on the top, and then this one should be on the bottom. So you notice how with the pins properly installed, they're both able to go fully in. There's no binding. They move in and out freely, and life is good. Now, if we reverse these by mistake, let's see what happens. And the funny thing is, on the other side of this car, when I was doing the brake job earlier, the pins were actually the wrong way. So if you put this one here, it sticks out too far. And if you put this one here, the hole inside is actually a slightly smaller diameter. And so with that rubber bushing on the slide pin, it's really hard to get in there, and the slide pin does not really want to go in, and it just kind of gets a little bit stuck in there. So not only are the pins different lengths, but in this case the holes inside the bracket are a slightly different diameter in order to accommodate for this little rubber bushing here. So see, this pin is all loose in here, but if you put it here, it's perfectly tight, and then this one fits perfectly here. So make sure that your slide pins, pay attention, put them in the right spot. Okay, now that that's over with, let me pull these back out temporarily, and let's get our new rubber boots put in. So, very important, cram these little guys in there. Now on this step, what you want to do is make sure that this gets seated all the way. So what you may have to do is take a little flathead, kind of go around, sort of push it in, make sure it goes in all the way. Yeah, so like right here, it's still not, it's not in all the way, you see that? So let me, hold on. There, now you can see it. I'm gonna push that in all the way, like that. So you gotta make sure that it's fully in the groove. Otherwise, your slide pin may get stuck. It's not gonna go in right. And you can always kind of look down in the hole too. And if something looks kind of off or a little wonky in there, then you'll be able to see that. So yeah, so this boot looks like it's good. Let me get the other one put in. Pinch that, press that in. Take a small flathead, make sure that that boot gets pushed in all the way. See right here it needs to go in a little bit more. So I'm gonna push that in. Okay, we look good over here now. Put a little bit extra before I slip it in. Okay, now long slide pin up here, and check your particular make and model for where the slide pins go. This is just for a 2010 Corolla, but the point is that there is an order to this, so make sure to pay attention. And push it all the way. It should seat. If something is binding up or not going in, then double check your work. But what you want to end up with in the end is a situation where, see, the slide pin can move freely on the top and on the bottom. See that? This is exactly what we want. I'm gonna wipe that a little bit off. But yeah, and these new boots, they will help to ensure that no water or dust or anything gets inside there and clogs things up. This bracket's ready. Now if I had a sandblaster, I could sandblast the whole thing and make it look pretty, but all of the spots that actually matter are cleaned off. And so this is ready to go back on the car. All right, next let's work on this a little bit. So I'm gonna get the rotor off. I'm gonna put one lug nut on a little bit. That way when I whack the rotor, it doesn't fly off. Take the lug nut back off. Rotor. All right. Okay, so what we're gonna wanna pay attention to here is another tip. Here on the hub surface, you're gonna wanna clean off all the rust. Not perfect, I mean, you know, we're not expecting 100% perfection, but you wanna get a great majority of the rust off in between the studs. This hub is actually not too bad, but what I'm gonna use is a little scrubbing brush like this. And I'm gonna go between the studs and around the studs and get all this cleaned off real quick. So you see the difference just going around the studs. You see how clean that is. So now I'm gonna go in between the studs. And I'm left-handed, so I'm actually on the wrong side of this thing here. I really need to be right over here. Yes, yes, controversy. Most people think this is a waste of time, but I'm telling you it's not. Okay, that is a whole lot better. I'm gonna take a little bit of sandpaper. I'm gonna use 220. And I'm gonna kind of go around the edge right here, where the scrubbing brush can't really get. Clean all this off. Afterwards, hit it with some brake clean and blow dry it. Now the reason you want to clean the rust off of this hub surface is because you want the rotor to sit as flat as possible on the hub, because if you've got you know, rusty spots all throughout the hub, the rotor is going to sit a little bit cocked to one side or the other, and then you're going to have a lot of run out in the rotor, and you can end up with a brake pulsation, shaking in the steering wheel when you're hitting the brake and that type of thing. So you can also end up with some uneven pad wear. In most cases, just some light surface rust isn't really enough to cause any issues, but with some more severe rusting, you definitely can have issues like that. And so to prevent all that, I always just clean the hubs off of every vehicle I do brakes on to make sure that I avoid that. Now, some people are going to wonder, should you put brake lube here on the surface of the hub where the rotor sits? And depending on who you ask, you may get a different answer. I say no. The reason I don't do it is because this is basically a spinning disc, and so if you put any lube on the surface, when you're going 70 or 80 miles an hour down the highway, this thing is spinning pretty fast, and the centrifugal force could throw some of that brake grease out onto the rotor and get on the pads and ruin the pads. So that's why I don't put anything here. Some people may say that a light coating is not going to hurt, and I'm not going to argue with that. If it works for some people, that's great, but personally I just leave this dry like this and I put the rotor on as is. Now, most brake rotors are going to have kind of an oily film on them, and the reason for that is because when they're in the packaging, it prevents them from rusting and developing a lot of surface rust. So what I do is put the brake rotor on backwards. That way I can hit it with some brake clean and clean all that oil off if there is any. This one really doesn't have a whole lot. Hit it with a light coat of brake clean, then flip it over. Do the same thing. That way if there's an oily film, it'll get wiped away, because you definitely don't want any oil contacting the brake pads. Next, I'm going to seat this all the way on the hub as much as it'll go. I'm going to take one lug nut, and these lug nuts are pretty long, so I'm able to do this. I'm going to screw it all the way on, and this will keep my rotor in place while I'm putting the caliper bracket and the caliper on. It'll prevent the rotor from falling off. If you've got a vehicle with some really short lug nuts and you're not able to thread it all the way on, you can just take a wrench like this, preferably not a ratcheting wrench, but one with an open end, and then you can put the lug nut on that way, and then the wrench kind of acts as a spacer, and it'll do the same thing. It'll keep the rotor in place. Now, sometimes the bolts that hold the caliper bracket into the steering knuckle, they have some Loctite from the factory on these bolts, and so if they do, and I recommend, get a little bit of blue Loctite and just apply some. You don't need too much, but just apply some to the bolts, Honestly, I found that this step is optional in many cases. And a vast majority of the time, if you do not apply any Loctite, it'll be perfectly fine as long as you tighten the bolts down sufficiently. You're not going to have any issue. But you're free to use a little bit of blue if you wish. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and get the caliper bracket back on. Now the torque is 80 foot-pounds officially. Some people are gonna crucify me for doing this, but usually, man, I just hit it with an impact. And yeah, I've done so many of these, I know how to not over or under tighten them, so I've never had an issue doing it this way. Now, the brake pads for this, you wanna be careful, try not to touch the friction material, especially with greasy fingers or greasy hands. Try not to touch this part. Now remember these squealers, we talked about them earlier. So in this case, because the rotor spins counterclockwise, then our leading edge is going to be up here. So we're going to want to put the squealers up here at the top. So in this case, it just clips on. And we're going to put it right up here. Now, this is another controversy, but I do not put any brake lube on the hardware where the hardware meets the pad. As you see, I just put it on dry like that. The only place I put lube is on the slide pins in between the bracket and the hardware. And then there's a couple other spots you'll see in a minute where I put brake lube, but I don't actually put any right here. And the reason why is because I believe that it attracts dirt and it ends up becoming more of a hindrance than a help. So I just leave it dry like that. Never had any issues doing it like that. And one more squealer to go on this pad for the end board. Stick that on the inside. Now when these pads are in, they should be able to move somewhat freely. You don't want them to be super tight in there. As you see that these are fine. Usually if the pads won't go in or they're super stuck and they won't move at all, it's usually because of rust on the bracket underneath the hardware. Okay, we're almost done here, just a couple more tips. So on the actual caliper itself, there's a couple spots you want to clean. Make sure that it's rust free. One is right here on the actual piston where it contacts the pad. Make sure you knock all that rust off. The other spot is on the back side where it meets the outboard pad and it touches right there. You're going to want to clean all that rust off as well. And I apply lube to both of those spots. Next, hit it with some brake clean. Then we're going to blow dry it. And just so you know, I am supporting the weight of this. I'm not letting it hang on the brake line. And once again, if you don't have a wire brush, you can use sandpaper here. It just takes a little longer, but it kind of does the same thing. And we're not trying to get it completely perfect because you're really not going to get it perfect unless you sandblast it, but this is sufficient for what we're trying to do here. Next, I'm going to take some of this same brake lube again, and I'm going to get a little bit out. I'm going to put some right here. Anywhere where the caliper is going to contact the pad, I'm going to put a little bit of lube. And with this stuff, it really doesn't require a whole lot, just a little dab, and it goes a long way. Now a little bit here on the face of the piston.
That's a lean color we could be in.
Now some people are going to wonder how come I don't just slather a whole bunch of this stuff on the backs of the brake pads where the shims are. And I could do it that way, but if I apply the lube here directly to the caliper, then it makes sure that the lube only stays where it needs to, because I don't want a bunch of dirt and stuff getting attracted to the back of the pads. Kind of like, you know, this spot here where it's open. If I have a bunch of lube there on the pad where it's open, then it's going to attract dirt, so I don't like that. And I got a little bit of lube on the caliper here, not a big deal, just going to wipe that a little bit. I just don't want it getting on the rotor. There we go. And I just realized I'm so into making this video, I forgot to depress the piston on the caliper, so very important. So let me do that real quick. Now, very important, before I depress the piston on the caliper, what I always do is I go up to the top and I open up the cap on the brake master cylinder. That way the cap on this Corolla, it actually just pops off. On some cars they twist off, and so on some cars, like the ones that twist off, if you don't remove those caps prior to depressing the piston, you can end up building up pressure inside the brake system, and that's not good. You could blow something out. So I always open up the cap on the top. That way, if there's any excess fluid that spills out, it'll be able to actually escape as opposed to building up a lot of pressure. Okay, here we go. Okay, now I'm gonna need to reapply my lube a little bit here, since it got all over my tool right now when I did that. Put a little bit here, put some around the edge. All right, now it's important to lube these contact points, because if you don't, you may end up with some unwanted squealing noises. So that is the purpose of that. So now let me stick this on. Get my two little bolts in back here. I'm going to tighten these up here. These are just 14s on this car. All right, let's see what kind of workmanship we have here. You see how easy this caliper slides like that? This is perfect. This is exactly what you want. Everything is properly lubricated. So this is what we want. We have the slide pin holes perfectly clean. The slide pin's clean. We got new rubbers. We got new brake hardware. We've got the squealers in the right spots. We've got all the lube in the right spots and none of the wrong spots. We have the hub that's cleaned off and ready to go. Everything is as it should be. Okay, I went ahead and got the wheel back on, so let's get this car down on the ground. Alrighty, so the car's on the ground, and I mentioned before about the brake fluid reservoir, and I mentioned about opening up the cap before you depress the piston on the caliper. So I'm gonna go ahead and now put the cap back on. This one just presses on. Next, you're going to want to come inside the car, and if you just start up the car and start driving, you're gonna wreck it because you're not gonna have a brake pedal. So go ahead and pump up the brakes a few times. Get those calipers to squeeze tight on the front brakes. And now you're ready to check your fluid level. So we're just below the maximum line. The minimum is way down there, so we're pretty good on the brake fluid level there. All right guys, so I just got back from driving this car, and I must say that it drives great. It no longer has a spongy brake pedal. The brakes are smooth, the brakes are quiet, there's no more brake pulsation. So guys, if you want a brake job, if you want it done right, I would follow the tips that I've outlined here in this video. That way you can have a good brake job done right. No noise, no vibration, no squealing, and you'll have brakes that'll last a long time. Once again guys, if there's something that you agree with or disagree with, something that I did that you don't agree with, or something that I didn't do that you wish that I would have done or you think I should have done, go ahead and let me know in the comments, and we can open up a discussion, because I think we'd all agree that brakes are probably the most important thing on a car. So we're all here to learn. So if you guys have any comments or anything you want to say, leave it down below and we'll talk about it. So thanks guys for watching this video. I appreciate you, and I'll see you next time.